For the last 3 years, the growth rate has been going parabolic. Never been seen before. Is it an inflation hedge? Well, don't look at the price, look at the fundamentals. It is.
Right.
People are flying into Bitcoin. It's not being reflected in price because the price action is irrational, and sometimes it's suppressed by very strong hands that are scooping more. The distribution in Bitcoin is, it's super important because if you control a lot of the asset, then it ceases to be, a decentralized network. The interesting thing for this cycle is the 100 Bitcoin to 1,000 Bitcoin strata, and that's the kind of high net worth individuals and the smaller hedge funds. They actually bought tons of Bitcoins, and there's been an outlier bump. And that bump started around $30,000 in January. So that bump we saw with dolphins and sharks, 100 Bitcoins upwards, but not the whales. That started to climb after Tesla started buying Bitcoin. It was very interesting. So it's interesting in that when Elon Musk threw FUD, there was a lot of selling as well. But those guys didn't sell that much. They still hold a lot of supply. But overall, the trend is looking absolutely great. I'm asking Raphael at Glassnode, CTO over there, to do a little bit of extra work in the counts of these different holders to get the populations. And if I can get that data, then I can run this thing called Gini coefficient across Bitcoin across the last 12 years. Which is cool. That's the wealth distribution that economists use inside an economy. So we can start to calculate that once I get that data. I think they're working on it now. So that'll be really interesting because from what I've seen, there's no other coin network that's even close to this level of distribution. It's a really strong argument. The distribution in Bitcoin is, it's super important because if you control a lot of the asset, then it ceases to be, a decentralized network. It can be pushed around by, like gold. Gold failed because it was too centralized in holdings. The governments held it; they used it to back money. So weird stuff can happen when you've got like large pockets of control of the coins. And so, Bitcoin's like amazing right now, what I'm seeing on chain. Very heartening. You still would have netted out okay. Maybe you netted out near zero. Maybe you did a small loss, maybe a little bit high. But essentially you netted it out and you ran essentially a carry trade over futures and Grayscale ETF, which was, double dipping. And, if that was the bet people were taking, then you'd sell your shares and then you'd buy back the futures if it hadn't expired. So what I expected was all this buy pressure from the futures as those guys exited their position and unhedged, essentially, if that makes sense. So there should have been a buy pressure because there's no sell pressure because Grayscale is not allowed to sell. They're holding the bag of those Bitcoins. Yet the buy pressure as they unhedge is being affected on the market. So you get a bullish impulse. The network growth in terms of users you can see on the blockchain, it's gone parabolic. It doesn't go parabolic. The user growth on the net, I'm talking about parabolic on a log chart, like we're used to. Normally it does that it grows and then it starts to taper, the growth rate starts to taper off. For the last 3 years, the growth rate has been going parabolic. Never been seen before. Is it an inflation hedge? Well, don't look at the price, look at the fundamentals. It is. Right. People are flying into Bitcoin. It's not being reflected in price because the price action is irrational, and sometimes it's suppressed by very strong hands that are scooping more. So there's all sorts of weird effects, like Elon Musk effects on the short-term price. But when I look at on-chain, I filter all the noise out, and I can see the long-term movement in capital and fundamental valuations on this network. And price doesn't often it tracks, but not always. And when it doesn't, those are great opportunities, because never in the history of Bitcoin has the fundamentals been not played out. I mean, often when inflation hits, there's a delay mechanism before everything goes haywire. But going back to the short-term pricing, like we were in an era, 2018, 2019, even early 2020, you could describe the price of Bitcoin as, it's not fundamentally driven, it was effectively a random walk. Imagine 50 years and the, whatever it is, like the halvening goes from 0.1 Bitcoin, or like a block reward of 0.001 Bitcoin to 0.0005 Bitcoins. It doesn't mean squat to supply and demand on the system. You're not going to get a supply shock. It's really, you're going to be like, if Barry Silbert still controls, like maybe by then 5% of the supply, and he's chewing on his 2% per annum, the supply shock coming from him dumping on the market's going to pale to the supply dumped by miners, and so it just becomes demand and supply, and like this, whether Mt. Gox created this 4-year cycle, if you look at how it has worked in the past, that was the first major tax season. People didn't really figure out paying taxes in 2013, but in December 2017, I just had a lot of friends going, oh man, we've got to pay taxes, holy. And they had to sell a ton of their coins because they were flipping altcoins in that crazy 2017 era of, hundreds of X if you got the right coins. Crazy, crappy Verge coin, like people were making 100x over a few months on it. And it was like, oh well, I know someone who bought a house from their Verge coin, and then like they paid more tax than their than they had left at the end of the bear season. So 2017 top probably was a tax top, but who knows what the next top is. I don't think there's going to be a well-formed FOMO bubble top anymore. Like, I want to just do a little bit more research into it. I'm starting to get some of the data behind it. Like, who are the sell pressure guys? Exchanges are, especially derivative exchanges. ETF management fees are. Miners are. We just have to get all of that together and then start to look at how those movements wander and how it compares to this 4-year sort of halvening drop. And I really think it's a minimal thing now.